My name is Dorian Sylvain. I'm a muralist, curator, exhibition designer, educator, and a community activist. I've been practicing in Chicago, particularly on the south side of Chicago, for over 4 decades. And I was very fortunate in the 60s and 70s to grow up experiencing many seismic shifts in our political, social, cultural landscape. Because of that, all of the influences within the Black arts movement has really shaped my practice and has shaped the ethos that I work within. Core to my practice is working with young emerging artists in a mentorship capacity, particularly for the purpose of building bridges. The public arts realm, the fine arts realm, they're hard practices to enter into. And as with myself, it was through the generosity of many artists that I was able to kind of form a practice, and I try to do the same. Part of the goal and the intention is to create the next generation of what we call cultural stewards, of passing on not only the information, but techniques, relationships, and Robert Paige was that for me as I was growing up. So during the 1970s, as I was entering my early teen years, I was a type of a young artist who was exposed very early to the cultural landscape in the city. My mother was very active in terms of involving us not only with classes, but with cultural activities throughout the city, be they be Chinese New Year's or the Ice Capades. We really use Chicago as in its full capacity in terms of exposure. But growing up on the south side, I had particular influences that were right there in what I would call my own backyard. Working within the Black theater, in particular the community theater, exposed me to quite a variety of artistic practitioners, from dancers, costumers, painters, poets, musicians, directors, producers. It was a real hub of activity. And so through my relationships there is where I became more exposed to Robert Paige and his work. Part of the landscape of the artists that I was involved with was embracing Afrocentricity, embracing ourselves as cultural stewards, cultural, embracing our historical culture. And so it was through particularly the Black community theater, that I became more exposed and more educated in relation to our cultural history in Africa. It's reflected in Robert Paige's work through his patterning, through his color palettes, through the movements of his work. And it became a very strong influence in terms of how I looked at myself in the diaspora of Black artists. The Black theater not only was a hub of cultural activity, but we also had other institutions that were very instrumental in bringing together artists to commune, to plan, to collaborate together. And those are such institutions as the Southside Community Arts Center and DuSable Museum. Those are places that really leaned into the idea of the value of our African culture, but the value of us self-identifying as Black and proud, which was one of the phrases that became very popular. People may be familiar with the James Brown song, "I'm Black and I'm Proud." Well, this was a real shift at that time. A lot of Black people, particularly on the South Side, who had been redlined for many years and didn't have access to even properties or certain neighborhoods. It was kind of this fear of being too Black. And so I kind of identify a little bit to the idea that there were sort of two tracks of Blackness going on at the time. And one was about assimilation, and the other was the idea of embracing unapologetically your Blackness. And so it was that group that I fell into when it came to the arts. It was promoting our history. It was talking about our history, which in the 60s and 70s was not embraced in terms of the broad social community. So the Black artists really were very revolutionary in claiming that, but they also brought along so much information with them. It wasn't just rhetoric. It was studying, it was traveling. Many artists would put their money together and go to Africa and build relationships in places such as Ghana. And so they were bringing back firsthand information, and they were passing it on to the younger generation, who at the time I was a part of. And it was the only place that I was able to really gain the pride in my Blackness. It was the one time that I was able to really put together the idea of the Black diaspora and what it meant to all of us collectively. So it was really through the arts, through the Black theater, that I was able to kind of build a positive identity for myself, and then find a home in which I could really flourish and explore my own Blackness and explore the cultural identity that's coming from Africa. I identify as a painter, most fundamentally. I think if you really kind of distill down my work, it all kind of bubbles up from the world of painting. And in my mid-20s, I guess, I really became fascinated with theater. And I was particularly fascinated with the idea of scenery. My mother immediately connected me to a lot of the local Black theaters, such as the Experimental Black Actors Guild. Again, in the 70s, the South Side was just flush with cultural centers. We had Kaumba Theater, we had Black Visions, the Chicago Theater Company, the ETA Theater. And so in all of those environments, I was really able to explore my interest in scenery, because as a young child, when I would go to plays or go to productions, it was always that initial walk across the threshold when you were exposed to the scenery that would really just transform me. And so I really understood the power of space and how to turn just a space into a place that has a different feeling, a different vibe, that creates a different relationship with the viewer. So oftentimes when I'm working on exhibitions in particular, I sort of put on my set design hat, and I understand the power of the walls as scenery, and I think of the art as the actor. It's about trying to build a relationship and create a big statement, a statement that can be all-encompassing. So again, when people cross this threshold here into Robert's exhibition, I want it to be all-encompassing. I am not a fan of white walls, and I figure that there's a lot of things that we could do to support Robert's work and help it to speak a little bit louder. So my intention from the very beginning was about allowing the viewer to have a relationship not only with the entire space, but then to have an intimate relationship with the individual pieces as they walk through the exhibition. Robert Paige and I have a relationship that goes back decades. As a young emerging artist growing up on the South Side of Chicago, I was so fortunate to have so many really radical Black artists accessible to me. And it was through these relationships with these Black artists, particularly in the Black theater, that I was really exposed to, for the first time, the idea of embracing my African heritage, the idea of unapologetically embracing what it means to be Black. And it was through these relationships that I was able to discover my identity as a community member, as a citizen to my neighborhood, and was kind of charged with this task of thinking of my art practice as something that was also supposed to benefit the community and uplift the community. It was an era of Black arts collectives. And Robert was very much a part of that. So I was extremely excited when I heard that his exhibition was going to be mounted here at the Hyde Park Arts Center, which is one of my creative homes and a organization that I have been involved with for many, many decades. When it came to looking at the artifacts that Robert was going to exhibit in this show, my mind went back to kind of my theater set design world in which I'm trying to create a space, an environment. I'm trying to transform the viewer in a large way, in a way that really amplifies not only the space, but can sort of cuddle Robert's artwork. I always use theater as a metaphor. I think of the artwork as the actors, and I think of the walls as the scenery. Fundamentally, I'm a painter in heart. And what I did is I applied various painting skills, not only decorative painting skills, but mural painting skills to help create this environment for Robert's artwork. I knew that I needed to engage the walls fully, from top to bottom, from side to side. I didn't want there to be any blank spaces. And I knew that we were also creating some pieces that would be sort of suspended. And so how do we pull together all these various bits and pieces that represent this long trajectory of artwork that Robert has been creating, but yet display it in a rather cohesive manner? So I leaned in on Robert's actual work and leaned in on the patterning, many that are sourced from traditional African fabrics, be it kente cloth or mud cloth, and also thinking about his techniques and how he is very painterly in how he approaches designing fabric pieces. This project was very unique for me. Certainly, as I mentioned, my mindset was that of a set designer. How do we create an environment that could resonate and really amplify what it is that Robert is exhibiting in this particular show? One of the things that was really important to me was to represent and amplify work that Robert has already done. And so I looked directly to his fabric pieces as sources of inspiration. My feeling was that many of the pieces are very intimate, very small in size, and we're putting them on these huge walls. So how can we create a space that not only gives a rather theatrical presence to the exhibition itself, but allows the viewer to also intimately view and experience Robert's pieces? Part of the challenge was not to overwhelm his pieces, was not to compete with his pieces. And my experience as a set designer is about complementing. You want to transform the space so that it doesn't feel hollow, but you also cannot overwhelm the artwork. So my challenge was trying to find that sweet spot in the middle that amplified his pieces really large scale, but then also was quiet enough that his other works could sit on top of it and still be viewed. The Hyde Park Arts Center has been what I describe as one of my creative homes. It's a space that has not only welcomed me in a variety of capacities, from artist to viewer to volunteer to teaching artist, but also the Hyde Park Arts Center has been very instrumental in my life because all three of my boys have grown up through the Hyde Park Arts Center, taking classes from very, very early on. It's part of my personality to want to participate and volunteer, and so the Hyde Park Arts Center has meant so many different things to me in partnership to the growth of my career. It is also, as I mentioned, has really helped to groom and to inspire my three sons, who are all artists themselves now. And it gave them a home in which they were able to find community. As a young artist myself growing up, those kind of environments were hugely important not only to commune and to find common purpose, but a place where you could grow, you could practice, you can build relationships, you can talk about collaborations, you can be experimental, you can be curious. And so the Hyde Park Arts Center has been a very instrumental part of my life for decades, and will continue to be. I continue to find new opportunities, new relationships, and I've also been a part as a teaching artist of trying to help groom this next generation of young artists right here. In the 1960s and 70s, and I have to go back because I have to go back to build some context around how I grew up and what the cultural, political, social landscape was at the time. And it was a time when there was a lot of division, particularly with the races, as we were struggling through civil rights, through the Black arts movement, through many different cultural movements to really ground ourselves in identity. The institutions that were available to us at the time, such as the Southside Community Arts Center and then later the DuSable Museum, were hugely important in building that community of Black artists, particularly artists that were of the same mindset of trying to embrace Afrocentricity. That wasn't the right word to say. But leaning in on the idea of and learning from our African cultural history. Hyde Park Arts Center is very unique similarly in that it helps build community. It helps build community where people can enter in at their own pace. It has it has become a space, or maybe has always been a space, in which you can bring your curiosity and you can find practical applications like printmaking and painting, ceramics, mosaic art, just a variety of skills and techniques that can be found here. But most importantly, I would have to say it's because there is not much access. There aren't many on-ramps for young artists. At least when I was growing up, art was a very core part of our curriculum. Sadly, I have witnessed art being removed from schools in almost all capacities. It's very rare to find a school that even has a full-time art teacher. So for me, this even becomes a more important institution in terms of filling that gap. Where do young people go to learn about art? Where do young people, even as teenagers or in their early 20s, where do they go to find their community of other young artists? And the Hyde Park Arts Center is almost an island right now, which is really a sad thing to say, that there's not more of these around. But that also speaks to how important it is that it does exist here. One of the things that I embraced as I was raising my children was the idea of access. And access to materials, access to other young artists, access to spaces in which they can explore. And not that they were committed to being artists, but it's also important in terms of just their own emotional, intellectual development to have access to art and to learn how to think of art in a holistic manner, not just an art class. So one of my experiences as a public artist in particular is that I cannot think of one single public project that I have done where I don't have at least one person, usually a mother, come up to me and say, "Oh, my daughter, she really loves painting, she really loves art. Where can I take her to go get some classes?" And it always breaks my heart because there aren't many places they can go. And it is such a crucial stage when children are young, when they're trying to explore these kind of things, when they are curious and they're open-minded about learning. that they don't have a place that will nurture that. So again, Hyde Park Arts Center kind of serves as a bit of an island because they make it all open and available for young people. And then they can kind of take it where they want to. But without that opportunity, without that access, so many young people who would potentially be or could grow into major artists, major contributors artistically to their communities, it gets kind of squashed. So one of the things that as a parent that I embrace very early on, which is a reflection of how my parents raised me, is the idea of just giving young people access. So I was what I call a Play-Doh mom, where from a very early age, I bought packs of Play-Doh like I bought a 12-pack of eggs, because I just wanted them to have things in front of them that they can play with, things that they could explore with, things that didn't have any particular outcome. So when I think of places like Hyde Park Arts Center and how there's so many really beautiful young people who come in here and get their first taste of, squishing clay or playing with, paint or playing with just a variety of materials that are available for them here at the Hyde Park Arts Center, I just understand this to be a real jewel. So over the years, we have all witnessed the removal of the arts from the curriculum, particularly in elementary schools, but also in high schools. So by not allowing children to kind of exercise that side of their brain early on, what I have experienced as an educator is that somewhere around 4th, 5th grade, if they haven't had the kind of stimulation that supports their interest in the arts, they start to feel insecure about exploring it as they get older. Many students will tell me, oh, I'm not an artist, or I'm not good at this or good at that. Well, those kind of attitudes are not present early on. And we often miss that moment with young people if we don't give them access, at least to materials. It doesn't have to be formal instruction. Sometimes it's just the permission to play. And so as an educator, that is one of the things I always try to emphasize, and that I emphasize with my own children, is that it's not about an outcome. It's about just playing. It's about having fun. It's about learning the materials. It's about being curious. And my experience often in the public is that people are looking for that. People are desperately looking for places where their budding young artists can grow and thrive. And it just sadly is not as accessible as I would like it to be. Yeah, my trajectory in terms of landing as into this world of mural painting had many steps. The first, as I've mentioned, is the idea that my parents made sure that I had access to arts environments, not always classes necessarily, but just artistic environments. When I engage with the public, when I do particularly public murals, one of my first observations is how fascinated people are about the process of making a mural. And it reinforces the idea of how removed art making is from the average person's experience. So particularly when I see young people that come up and are fascinated, sometimes just because of the scale, because it's big, if they express any interest in joining and working with me, I always say yes. Not try to say yes, I always say yes. Matter of fact, even in this exhibit itself, there were some young students that were coming out of a ceramics class, and they kind of poked their heads in, and I invited them in. I was busy painting the walls. I was up on the lift. And I asked them, I said, do you want to paint with me? And they were like, oh yeah, that'd be so great. And so I handed them a paintbrush. I showed them an area in which they can work. One of the other young ladies, I handed her a roller and kind of showed her how to use a roller. And so to me, that's just so heartwarming because they're still so fresh and they're so curious and they're so anxious to be involved and to learn. So even in public spaces, it's the same thing. People want to be involved. They're fascinated by the process. They're in awe of the scale, particularly if you're working on large equipment, 40 feet in the air. But young artists, I always encourage them, come and join. I try to include what I call public paint days where people can just come and jump in. Sometimes I will have things pre-drawn and then all they need to do is like pick a color, pick an area and sort of work within that area. But it's that collective experience that is so impactful for them. Most of the people that will participate with me aren't interested in becoming artists, but they are interested in expressing an artistic side of their personality. And they're also very interested in communal activities. So I have had some young people, and I think particularly of a couple of years ago when I was working at Arbor Gresham, a resident who's there, he lived in Arbor Gresham for many, many years, and we were painting this big mural, and so you could see it from really blocks away because the mural was so tall. And so the day after we primed that whole wall white, this young man shows up and he introduces himself to me. Of course, he whips out a phone and says, I'm an artist too, and he starts showing me, some of his stuff. Well, I immediately find this to be an opportunity to try to bring him in. He asked me even directly, he said, how do you become a muralist? How do you get involved in this kind of work? And I knew that my responsibility to community and my responsibility as a citizen is to try to help him realize that. So I told him what our schedule was. I said, you're welcome to come back, and work with us. He was there the next day, bright and early in the morning. And he was so enthusiastic and literally had very good painting skills that I ended up hiring him for the whole summer. And so, I take very seriously the opportunity to try to be that bridge, particularly for emerging artists who are just looking for an opportunity. There's no one way of getting into this field. And so I understand that oftentimes I can be that moment for them that gives them the confidence, gives them the relationship, gives them the opportunity to grow as an artist and to kind of stretch their own wings. And with that experience, it gives them confidence to try to even find more experiences. So it is kind of like a snowball, where you give young people access, you give them tools, you give them a community, you give them some opportunities, and then they're able to kind of take off. The United Colors of Robert Paige is such an amazing exhibition. He is such an amazing artist that has contributed decades worth of work. And here at the Hyde Park Arts Center, we've been thinking about planning, working on this exhibition for literally years. And it's so wonderful to see it all come together. We invite people to come and experience this exhibition. It has been well planned and it has been executed with so much love and so much respect for what Robert Paige has meant, not only to the South Side of Chicago, artists like myself, but it is a career that is inspiring.